Moussaka is a name given to several different dishes made in Greece, Turkey, and parts of the Middle East. These dishes are actually so different from each other that if they had separate names, no one would even think that they had the same origins. There's different ingredients, some are layered, some aren't, served anywhere between piping hot to straight out of the refrigerator. Served for dinner, served for breakfast. The version that I'm showing here is primarily the Greek type, made in layers and covered with a bechamel sauce. However, I have used Middle Eastern spices because I think they complement the lamb much better. Without this change, this dish tastes very outdated, which is also why it's faded from popularity over the last 20 or 30 years. This not only brings it back to life again, but also makes it extremely convenient for either the home or restaurant service, as you'll see. Because both the fenugreek and the sesame seeds burn rather easily, and they toast at different temperatures, I'm doing them separate. When working with small amounts of sesame seeds, it's actually easier to use a pastry brush to move them around. Silicone pastry brush, of course, it doesn't burn. And then you can also use this to sweep them out of the pan into a cup when they're toasted enough. And when you see them darkened up, that's enough. You certainly don't want to burn them. You don't need them to be real dark. This is fine. Now we're going to toast it. Sometimes this toasts very quickly. You have to watch it. Do not let it burn. You just want it slightly darkened. As soon as that's darkened a little bit, it's done. Into the spice grinder, we have thyme, sumac, the toasted sesame seeds, toasted fenugreek, and 1 bay leaf. And these are going to get ground to fairly fine. And you pour this out, you mix it up with the coarse black pepper and the kosher salt. And this is our seasoning mix. I'm going to be grinding my own lamb for that. That way you know that you get the best quality meat. After taking the meat off the bones, we have, of course, the bones, which I'm going to roast, and I'm going to use these to make a stock, which will be used in this recipe. You don't have to do that. I'm going to show you an alternate method. But now this meat has to be passed to the grinder. I'm using the coarse setting, and I'm going to pass it through 2 times. I'm going to pass it through twice. Into a hot pan, I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil, so like a tablespoon just to start it off. And then I'm going to put all of the lamb in. And all of that seasoning mix, entire batch. Start stirring this around and cooking it in order to get some of the fat out of the lamb and brown it real well. Don't want to stir it too much, especially at the beginning. This is about 6 minutes later. I have not stirred it at all yet. This is the first stir it's getting. The spices have just been sitting up on the top of the lamb. You can see there's already a lot of fat rendering out here. Stir it a little bit more. Here. And I'm going to let it brown some more. And then I'm going to have to drain the fat off in just a minute. After a few minutes, you're going to put the meat in a sieve like this to drain the fat off. Keep drained meat separately. We're going to use the fat in the next step. Okay, in a pan, we've got the lamb fat that we rendered off. I'm going to add a tablespoon or so of that, and I'm going to fry the onions in the lamb fat. Meanwhile, in a back burner, I've got those lamb bones that I roasted with a couple of scraps of onion, and I'm going to put in about a cup of red wine. In a minute, I'm going to add just a little bit more water to cover. This is one of those times you just kind of, after I added a little bit more water, you just kind of add whatever vegetable scraps you have laying around. Trim from other things. I'm adding some mushrooms, some celery root. What else have we got here? Okay, I got a piece of carrot. You can use that. So this is just going to get brought up to a simmer and left to cook for a little while. After about 10 or 15 minutes, when the onions have got some quite brown from being cooked in the lamb fat, we're going to add the tomato sauce. Pureed tomatoes, excuse me. Restaurants, we call this tomato sauce. It's nothing more than pureed tomatoes. Start cooking this down. If you have one, you're going to want to put a splatter guard over the top of this because we're going to turn the heat up fairly high, and tomatoes are going to be popping all over the place after just a couple. While everything else is going on here, we've got to now take care of the eggplant. The oven is still hot from having roasted those bones, so this is about the thickness you want to cut the eggplant up. And we're going to roast this on a baking sheet. Just spread it out on a baking sheet. Add a little bit more olive oil over the top of this. Some coarse kosher salt. Would be fairly generous. Okay, and these go in the 200-degree oven. Okay, when the tomatoes get to a stage where you start to smell an aroma, they're not burnt, but they're getting close to burnt. This is a difficult aroma to explain clearly, but you'll know it when you smell it. You're not smelling actual burn, but they're getting there. You can tell that pretty soon the next stage is going to be burnt. Then take this that we had the wines, the vegetables, the other thing, the lamb bones in. Just quick coarse sieve into the tomatoes. Stir this around. Now we're going to reduce it some more. Those lamb bones weren't fully extracted, I know, because they only cooked for about 45 minutes from the time that I started them. But they've contributed flavor here, and that's all you really want to do with them. They're not critical to the recipe. It's just a little extra nuance of flavor. You could leave that out; it would still be fine. You could just add the wine and a little bit of water if you wanted to. But this makes it a little bit richer, a little bit nicer. Okay, now it's bubbling again. I'm going to put this back on it and let it cook for a little while longer while the eggplant's cooking. Okay, it's been about 10 more minutes cooking this. I turned the heat down some, by the way. Now I'm adding the garlic to it. And this is almost ready. I'm actually going to turn the heat way down to 2 now. And just keep this on a kind of low simmer. We're going to blend this sausage. And while the eggplant is finishing up in the oven, we've got the potatoes that are cut into 3mm slices, and these need to be blanched in salted water. And after the potatoes have been blanched, just strain them in a colander and let them sit there and steam. And in yet another pan, we're going to begin making the roux with 45 grams of butter and 2 tablespoons of flour. And when you've got the pale roux built, you can add the milk to it. Start whisking this in to thicken it up. And now that the tomato sauce has cooled off, I'm putting it in the cup of the stick blender and puree this. And finally, having all the parts together, we're going to start actually assembling this thing. I thought the day would never come. There's a lot of parts to this. Okay, so first step is to get a layer of potatoes down on the bottom and run them up the sides just a little bit. These are the blanched potatoes, obviously. Okay, and after you're content with the way that is, we're going to put some mozzarella in here. The reason why is this mozzarella is going to melt and seal these potatoes together to kind of act like a mortar to put them together and hold it in one piece. Okay, maybe just a little bit more. We're going to have to grate the mozzarella and use it. It's going to use about 160 grams in all of the mozzarella. And make sure you get this bottom layer sealed tight though, with lots of cheese. Okay. And now we have the first layer of meat. I'll go down. Okay. Then we start putting some sauce over the top of this. Then it's going to be the first layer of eggplant. Kind of smooth the sauce down a little bit with the eggplant as you're working. Now you've got it this far. Now you got to do a little bit tricky part. You got to take the potatoes, more potatoes, and you're actually going to wedge them in between this meat and the bottom. Go around the entire way. This is going to make the crust around the edge. Let's see how I'm doing this. Finish with the potatoes. Now we put some more cheese in. Again, this is like mortar. If you're building a building, you want to use the cheese to keep everything together. Next, we're going to put about half of that bechamel we made in. The rest of it won't drip down. You have to get it up this. You have to put it between the layers, of course. Okay. That's good. Now more meat. Put the rest of the meat in. Okay. Now more tomato sauce. Same as before. This is the rest of the tomato sauce, by the way. Just smoothing it out. So there's 2 layers of tomato sauce, 2 layers of meat. So when you're working, it's pretty easy. Just divide the amount in half, and you wind up with the right amount. If you're a little bit off, it won't matter. Okay, good. The rest of the eggplant. Okay, another layer of cheese. Now we put the rest of the potatoes down on the top here. Now, more of the bechamel. Okay, it's starting to thicken up. Probably should have heated it a little bit to thin it out and make it easier to pour at this point. That's okay. We'll work with it. Also, as it cooks, it'll spread out a little bit on its own. So if it's a little bit gloopy right now, don't let it worry you. It'll be fine. When it cooks, it'll all melt together. And then finally, the last step. Get the rest of this on here. Finally, grate a little bit of Parmesan Reggiano over the top of this. And then we're going to put a cover on it. The first part of the bake will be with the cover on to get all the ingredients in there settled down and homogenized. Then we'll take the cover off and let it brown on top. Here we go. To the oven again. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.